This is London's biggest conversation with Anthony Davis.
Tuesday. Thank you for joining LBC 97.3. I'm Anthony Davis. Let's turn our attention first to cycling in the capital. As a cyclist has died, as you just heard in the news, another has been seriously injured today in two separate incidents, both involving London buses. Well, the first crash happened at 9:15 this morning when a 46-year-old man was hit in Kennington. And then 3 hours later, another male cyclist, he was hit in East Croydon and pronounced dead a short time later. Well, it brings the total number of cyclists killed in London this year to 11. It's effectively one a month, isn't it? Which is clearly 11 too many. So let's look at this tonight and ask, how can we make London's roads safer for cyclists? And why haven't we done it already? 0845 6060 973 is the number to call. That's 0845 6060 973. Now, I cycle in London. I used to use the Boris Spikes, the hire scheme, Barclays hire scheme, until they doubled the price and decided that it was actually cheaper to have my own bike, but haven't got round to doing that bit yet. So I walk and I take the bus, and occasionally I drive, but in the main I am on foot. And even as a pedestrian, you have to be terribly careful. I once got hit by a truck going by as I was waiting to cross the road, and its wing mirror smacked me on the shoulder and almost span me around where I stood. And you recognise that in London especially, because of our narrow streets and our increasingly large vehicles, I mean, you only have to look at the new Roastmaster, as it's called, the new bus for London, is massive, way too big for London, far bigger than the original Routemaster that was genuinely designed for our streets. So we are aware of hazards, but for cyclists, the more I think about it, I just think, I don't know if I want to take the risk of being a cyclist in London again. And when I used to cycle, and going around the Victoria one-way system near where I live, which is riddled with roadworks and will be for the next few years, it is an absolute assault course of obstacles and danger. And buses do play their part in this. Now, we know the mayor is supposedly, putting his best foot forward. He, of course, is a cyclist himself, cycles from Islington into City Hall most days. He must know more than anybody of the dangers. And, in fact, there have been a couple of occasions where we've reported that Boris himself has nearly been killed on his own bike. So how can we make London's roads safer for cyclists? And how can we do it now, sooner rather than later? The mayor's transport policies are all very well, but they're going to take quite a while to see through. 0845 6060 973. Do you cycle in London? And maybe you've spotted a way of actually saving lives. Well, Caroline Pidgeon is the Liberal Democrat Deputy Chair of the London Assembly's Transport Committee. Caroline, good evening.
Good evening, Anthony.
Thanks for joining us on the programme. Now, you weren't you taking part in this debate earlier today regarding cycling?
I certainly attended some of the discussions this morning, and I think it's with a backdrop of the tragic deaths we've seen over the last few days, and also the general backdrop that we've seen, as you say, 11 cyclists die on the roads this year, and serious injuries over the last couple of years have gone up about 18% for cyclists on London's roads. So, tragic cycle deaths, but also serious injuries as well, and clearly more needs to be done. And I think at last it feels to me the mayor has kind of woken up that there is a serious problem, and serious investment is needed to make our roads safer for cyclists and ultimately for everyone.
Now, he hasn't really pledged any more money for cycling, has he? He's just taken the budget over the length of his mayoralty and, was it ring-fenced around £350,000 to create these separate lanes?
Yeah, I mean, the money we've argued about, I mean, I think it's over 900 million over his business plan. But I think the real issue is, how is this money spent? And when the cycle superhighways first came in, I argued in the Liberal Democrat budget at the Assembly meeting that we should stop them rolling out further and use the money that was going to be used to expand these cycle superhighways to put right issues with dangerous junctions on the existing superhighways. And at the time I was criticised for trying to delay improving cycling infrastructure. But, it doesn't give me great pleasure. But a few years later, we're absolutely proved right that some of these junctions were never properly dealt with. Putting a bit of blue paint on the road has meant some cyclists have felt they've got this false sense of security, and they think that they have got the right of way, when actually many of these cycle routes are only advisory. They're not segregated, they're not mandatory. And I think with what we saw last week, the Mayor has opened up a dedicated, segregated cycle route in East London. He started to realise that that's the only way you're going to keep many cyclists safe, particularly with the volumes we're now seeing on our roads.
His spending on transport has been questionable, to say the very least, and I'm his greatest critic of the new route master, because I live on the 24 route and I have to travel on that blooming bus every day, and it is a monumental waste of money, and I speak with daily experience. But also look at the cable car. No one's travelling on that. We've paid millions towards that. The cycle hire scheme doesn't really pay for itself, hence them doubling the cost of it recently. If he'd have spent all this money on cycling and cycle routes and separate superhighways rather than just blue paint, might we have saved lives?
Potentially, you might well have saved lives, but I think it's true. The Mayor has a range of projects, his vanity projects, the cable car and the bus and so on, as you said, that he said would pay for themselves, and they haven't. The cable cars cost £60 million to be built, and hardly anyone's using it. And I'm not surprised at £4.30 each way, which is what it costs. But I think in terms of London's roads, I think there has been over the last couple of years real momentum building, with the cycling community growing from not just your sort of typical lycra cyclists. It's actually every person in London wants to cycle, or many of them do, and more are, and it's actually how you make the roads safer for absolutely everyone rather than that sort of hard-nosed cyclist. And that means looking at some of these difficult junctions, the gyratories and so on. But it also means tackling some things like the lorries on our roads in London, making sure they're safer, they've got the modern mirrors and safety equipment. And maybe after today we've seen 2 buses involved. Should there be other equipment added to buses to make sure that they're very much aware when cyclists are around them? So I think there's lots more that needs to be done. And we need to make sure, because more people want to cycle. They say that safety is the main obstacle to people cycling. Well, let's make the roads as safe as we can and slow down the speed on our roads so that more people will cycle safely.
Is it a problem that the Barclays cycle hire scheme does not rent helmets, and that it encourages people to cycle without any form of protection?
Well, I mean, I'm an occasional hire bike user. I have my own cycle helmet I take with me, and I see lots of people doing that. But, at the end of the day, I guess it is down to choice, and they can't put helmets onto the bikes, as it were. But I personally would recommend, if you're cycling in London, you wear a cycle helmet.
And just finally, I mean, buses and cyclists clearly don't mix, especially with bigger buses and more of them. But it's London's roads that really are the problem. They were designed for the Victorian, for the horse and cart, effectively. And we've certainly filled up the streets. I mean, is this more about, changing London, or the face of London going forward on a greater level, pedestrianising more of London, doing away with so many of the road routes, the driver routes, and making cycle-only roads? I mean, is there actually a far more radical policy that could be brought about for the capital that won't affect us economically, but actually will make life easier and safer for most people?
Yeah, I think there is a sort of way forward that you could actually really look at the landscape of London, look at what it should be in the 21st century. As you say, I mean, I'd like to see things like Oxford Street pedestrianised, but actually look at some routes should be dedicated to cyclists. And it may well mean that, we want to encourage cyclists onto certain, perhaps quiet ways where they know they're going to have a much, quieter route through the centre of town or wherever. And I think that's what we need to be looking at, rather than thinking this road has always been used in this way, and look at that, quite limited space in parts of the centre of town, how we can best use that for, maximum effect to help people travel around London safely.
OK. Caroline, thank you for joining us on the programme tonight. Caroline Pidgeon is the Liberal Democrat Deputy Chair of the London Assembly's Transport Committee here on LBC 97.3.